Hello and welcome back to Bend and Snatch. I am Pennie, your host, and today I'm going to be sharing 3 short stories about strong women from the Bronze Era. Bronze Era of strength training, so like 100 years ago, not the Bronze Age, which came after the Stone Age about 4,000 years ago. Different periods of time. So recently I started a series on my Instagram where I shared stories of a few strong women that I found in my research. And I think a lot of people imagine that strength training for women is a pretty modern development, popularized in, say, the last 10 to 20 years, paving the way for women's gyms to open up across the country and female athletes to grow in prominence. But what if I told you it wasn't all as new as it seemed? So just yesterday, I read the story of Lulu Hurst in Graham Kent's book. So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding the book, The Strongest Men on Earth. And this was such a cool story. So it's the late 1800s, right? Like 1880 or something. And there's this 16-year-old girl called Lulu, and she's in her bedroom. Her cousin's staying over. They're sleeping in the same bed, and the house gets struck by lightning. And her cousin is scared. She's so scared. Her eyes are closed. She's very, very concerned about the lightning. And all of these things around the room are being thrown around, like pillows and furniture. And it's chaos. She is losing her mind. So then the next day she tells everyone the story, and Lulu's telling everyone the story, and they're telling everyone about how all the things are flying around the room. And everyone is like, that is crazy. And then Lulu starts presenting these powers, right? So she's able to make stuff move, make stuff like jump around, hold stuff in unusual ways, and everyone is losing their mind. So she ends up going to become like a circus performer, right? She goes on the road with her dad and some guy, and they're doing this tour. And she has everyone in her grasps, right? Everyone is loving it. She's like holding umbrellas, and men from the audience are trying to push them down and they can't. And she's like holding up chairs, and there'll be 3 men trying to push the chair and they can't do it. And she's just like outlifting everyone. It's very impressive because remember, she's also a 16-year-old girl still. She's small, and everyone is not as strong as her, and they don't know what's happening, and they're like, this is magic. She's got some magnetic force. It's from the lightning. It's incredible. So her career lasts only 2 years, but in those 2 years she makes money. Like, she goes home with so much money, and the reason she ends up stopping her performing career is because she got so famous that other people would start using her stage name and putting on shows, but they weren't as good as her, and it really tarnished her name. So then people are going to shows thinking they're seeing Lulu, and they're not. They're seeing someone else, and this someone else is not as impressive. So eventually she calls it a day. She goes home with all the money she made with her dad and I think her husband now. Remember, she was 16 when this started. And then she lives happily ever after. And then years and years and years and years later, she writes this autobiography where she tells everyone basically how she did it. And this is actually the best part of the story. So that night with the lightning and her cousin's eyes were closed, and she just wanted to wind her up. She could see how scared her cousin was, and she thought it was hilarious. So then she just starts throwing stuff. Like, her eyes are so shut, so she's just throwing things around, throwing pillows, throwing everything. And her cousin was so scared, and she was so worked up, and Lulu was putting on such a good performance that the next day when they were telling the story, her cousin thought that she could see all the things. Like, she was telling the story as though she could see the things flying around. And Lulu was like, I'm going to see how far this goes. So she's just like pushing her luck. She's being a bit silly. She's being a kid, right? But everyone just keeps falling for it. And she must have been a real good actor, and she must have been just real smart as well. So she ends up going on the road, and she was saying that the reason that she was able to like hold this chair up with these 3 men trying to push them was just because she was smarter than everyone else. So she was strong, sure, like above average strength for a 16-year-old, but she was much smarter than everybody else was. So then she was putting people in these positions where their leverages were just not working in their advantage, right? So she is holding the things up and she's getting them to stand in a particular way, and there'll be 3 men trying their darndest, right? Max effort, really trying to push it, but they're just falling over. They can't do it. And it's because of leverages. It was just maths. And is that not the best thing ever? Because What do you mean? Hundreds and hundreds of men are going to these shows being outsmarted by this 16-year-old and they literally can't fathom what's happening. They think she's magical. They think she's got these magical powers. Anyway, that was great. That was my favorite story from the book that I read yesterday. I'm going to tell you two more stories about two of the women that I've already written about on my Instagram. So at the turn of the 19th century, there were loads of strong men growing in popularity across Europe on the circus circuit, right? But physical culture wasn't just for the boys. Obviously, I was just telling you about Lulu, but she was a different sort of performer to the strong women, the other strong women, even though she was still strong. That was more maths and smarts and just being a nerd and being a good actor. Whereas the next two women I'm going to tell you about were also like proper strong women, right? And there were plenty of female performers hitting the stage at that time as well, wowing crowds with their strength and their pizzazz. But much like the fragile men of today, not everyone was happy about it. Women, of course, were supposed to be weak and ladylike. And how dare these women stand on a stage and show the world that a woman could actually be strong too? It's an abomination, an outrage, a huge, huge attraction. So let's start with Katie Sandwina of the next two. So she was born Kate Bromwich in 1884 in Vienna to Bavarian parents, and she was all about that strong life from day one. So her parents were also performers in the German circus circuit. So they were performing these incredible feats of strength. So that was her parentage, right? They were already doing it. She was already living that life. And her dad was said to have lifted 230 kilos with just one finger, and her mother had 15-inch biceps. Now, when I read that, I went and obviously immediately measured my biceps to compare, and they are a staggering 11 inches. And that was with my jumper on. Look at these. Ugh. So 15 inches is loads. And obviously I'm not much of a standard of what strength and size looks like by any means, but I was just for reference, you know? So she was huge. Records show that she stood at 6'1", weighed nearly 90 kilos, and it wasn't long before she was part of her parents' routine, along with many of her 13 siblings. Like, there were loads of them. It was a very impressive show, and they were all really strong. And she used to wrestle men on stage, as well as like lifting them up over her head and performing feats of strength with like barbells and dumbbells. But she was too impressive, and before long she outgrew Germany, and then in the early 1900s she moved to New York with her husband. And that's where the name Katie Sandwina was born. So legend has it that she claimed the name after beating the legendary Eugene Sandow in a strength contest in New York. The circus Kate was working at would regularly issue challenges to the crowd to see if there was a man among them capable of outlifting her. And her abnormal strength was a huge crowd pleaser. So the story goes that one night, the great Eugene Sandow stepped forward to take on the challenge, and the audience was packed. Not a soul among them believed that Kate could outlift Eugene, who was known for lifting a 159 kilo pony and pressing 140 kilos over his head, as well as doing a somersault whilst holding two 25 kilo dumbbells, so like one in each hand. He even famously tore through 3 decks of playing cards. Now, look, I've torn through 1 deck of playing cards before, and it took me weeks to build up to it, and it never actually occurred to me to try more than 1 pack, but like, man must have had hands of steel, okay? So anyway, he steps up to this challenge, right? Kate wasn't phased. As the challenge commenced, she would lift a weight over her head, and then he would lift the same weight, and then they'd increase the weight each round, and again, and they just kept going until they got to 140 kilos on this tiny little dumbbell. And without missing a beat, Kate gets it over her head. 1 hand, boom, easy. Up steps Eugene, sweat dripping from his brow. He tried his best, yeah, but he could only get the dumbbell up to his chest, conceding the loss. Katie Sandwina then became a household name after that. She claimed her name from his. And I mean, I say legend has it when I started this tale because I don't actually even know if that was a true story or not. It's written on her wiki page and loads of blogs about her, but physicalculturestudy.com has this disclaimer on their article about her saying that they couldn't actually find any real evidence to substantiate the story. So who knows if it really happened, but also it might have. So the fun of the circus is that it's all kind of a mystery, right? Isn't it? So either way, Katie Sandwina was clearly strong as hell and built a reputation for herself as a badass. But women are never free from the societal constraints of forced gender roles, even when your job is literally to be stronger than any man that you meet. So in 1911, an influential American journalist named Kate Carew ran a story about Sandwina, introducing her to a wider US audience. And she told the States that while Katie had arms strong enough to lift 240 pounds over her head, so that's about 109 kilos, she didn't have any of those ugly muscles. Like, in fact, and I quote, "No horrid lumps of muscle, dear, just a little ripple under the skin like mice playing in a mattress." That was what she said in her article. So there, Sandwina's caught, right, between being the embodiment of femininity and also its antithesis of what a woman should be. She was strong, she was independent, she was also a known suffragette. And she would perform incredible feats of strength in front of packed out audiences, claiming her spot in a mostly male dominated field. And she'd be asked questions about her maternal nature, her feminine love, and other such things. And like, it's not too dissimilar to the ridiculous questions that female athletes today are asked by journalists. Questions about hair and boys and dating. Questions that their male counterparts never have to worry about. American society was struggling with the idea of strong women 100 years ago. And it still is today. Fragile men continue to panic at the thought of a woman being able to outlift them or really outperform them in any way. And their fear results in barriers constantly being put up in women's way. So Katie and her husband ran a bar in New York in their later years, which they advertised as belonging to the strongest woman in the world. And she would occasionally dazzle patrons with minor feats of strength, like bending iron bars, breaking iron chains, etc. And if people were lucky, when they came in for their dinner, they might even get to see her using her husband as a human barbell. She was quite famous for just picking him up, throwing him about. She died at 67 in 1952. I feel like it's kind of a legend. So I've got another Kate for you as well. This one is actually a British Kate. There weren't many British strong women. So far, she's the only one that I found. That doesn't mean she was the only one that existed. I've not learnt about everyone that existed in Britain in the whole entire history of things, but she's the only one that I found. So her name was also Kate. Her stage name was Vulcana. She was from Wales, and her story is really interesting. So she started lifting weights in the late 1800s when a gymnasium opened in her hometown of Abergavenny by a strong man known as William Roberts. And by the age of 15, William had invited her to perform as a strong woman at the Pontyfull Fete. This is reportedly her first public appearance. A lot of what we know about Vulcana is actually fictions, but it's almost impossible to separate the fact from the fiction, and part of that is thanks to the storytelling, or perhaps lies, misdirection of her brother, partner, Atlas. We'll circle back to that. So Kate left Wales at 16 to join his troupe of strong people in London. William and Kate would soon reinvent themselves as Vulcana and Atlas, brother and sister strong-person act. This ruse remained in place until long after their deaths, apparently. The pair travelled across Europe performing incredible feats of strength, and Vulcana was a phenomenon. A woman so strong that she could lift a grown man above her head with one hand. And there are photos of her doing that. So we know that bit of the story is definitely true. And I have posted a photo of that on my Instagram if you want to go see, if you're listening on Spotify right now. If you're listening on YouTube, I'll actually just put a photo here. So, thank the gods for 19th century technology, I guess. I'm sure when people look back to now, to the 2020s, having video evidence and photographic evidence of something probably won't actually mean anything. But I'm assuming any photos I find from 100 years ago, that was an AI, right? There are so many incredible stories of Vulcana's feats of heroism, not just strength. And these are the bits that I think are the really interesting ones as well. So in 1910, she was the first person to alert the police of the disappearance of her friend Cora Crippen, who performed as Belle Elmore. This ultimately led to the investigation, prosecution, and execution of Cora's husband, Dr. Hawley Crippen. Police found Cora's torso buried under the brick floor of the basement, which was found to contain traces of this toxic compound. The man has killed her, quartered her, buried her under the floor, and then he fled the country. But somehow, in the end, they got him. Vulcana was sort of at least partially responsible for that crime being solved. So then in 1921, she literally ran into a burning building to save a horse. It wasn't even her horse. So the Garrick Theatre in Edinburgh had caught fire on the evening of Society Athletes' performance, and she ran back into the fire to save the horse belonging to one of the other performers. She risked her life, and she walked away with really serious burns to her head to save that horse. I mean, icon, right? She also decked a man in 1902 for trying to pickpocket her, knocking him unconscious and handing him into the police herself. Some of her most notable feats of strength, other than throwing Atlas around, included bent pressing 56.5 kilos with her right hand, but it might have been 66, and pressing 25 kilos overhead in each hand. But for sure, she was stronger than that, because we know she could get her husband over her head with one hand, which means we also know that some of her lifts are like lost. But there were plenty of witnesses who saw her lift the wagon with her bare hands to free it from the stones in Covent Garden after getting stuck there. So, like, there was a wagon, it was stuck in the cobbles, there were lots of people around. She literally picked it up so then they could change the wheel or something. I don't know. Impressive. The problem, though, was that Atlas, her sort of husband, but never officially because of the Brotheroo's partner man, he was a showman, and he was caught lying on more than one occasion about his own lifts. Like, there was at least one time, but maybe more times, where he'd be on stage and be like, this is this many kilos, and then he'd go to pick it up, and then someone from the audience would come on in and be like, that is incorrect, sir, and then they would pick it up, or they would check, and it would be a lie. He would be proven to be lying in front of the crowds. And his reputation for being a liar, unfortunately, rubbed off on Vulcana, and she was painted with the same brush, which means the numbers written for her feats of strength, if they were written by him, nobody believes them, because he was not a trustworthy source, which is a shame for her, you know? Never trust a man, I guess. So her and her brother husband, they had 6 kids, and all of them joined the circus. And then they retired from performing in 1932. She died in 46 at the big old age of 72, and she actually outlived Atlas and also one of her daughters. And earlier that year, she got hit by a taxi. At 72, she got hit by a taxi in London. That didn't kill her. I mean, maybe it killed her slowly, because she died, I think, 6 months later, but didn't kill her at the time. How many 72-year-olds can be hit by a taxi? I mean, I guess the taxi was going much slower than taxis would go these days. I don't actually know if the taxi was a wagon and a horse or a car. Were there cars yet? No, there were cars. Of course there were cars. It was the 40s. Of course there were cars. That was a silly thing to say. Anyway, I'm assuming it was a car, I guess. Anyway, so she eventually dies, outliving Atlas and one of the kids. And those are stories of 2 strong Kates, and also a journalist called Kate. I guess they really loved the name Kate 100 years ago, as well as a Lulu. And the Kate stories, they're both on my Instagram if you want to go have a look. There might be a bit more detail about some different things in there. You can also see some photos if you didn't get to see any photos in the YouTube right now. So if this is something that you enjoy, I can do more episodes sharing more stories about strong women from the past. I thought it was really cool. This is a really short episode. Hopefully you also think it's really cool. Bit nerdy. If you like history or strong women. I mean, if you don't like strong women, I'm not sure why you're here, actually. So hopefully you liked it. Until next time, I guess. Have a good day.